Who are the wealthy in the United States? They are the richest 1 to 5% of the population. Now, how did they get wealthy? Not directly from income. We tend to downplay the importance of ownership. Earnings and wealth are correlated at 0.2, which is very weak. How did they get that way? Most people would say inheritance. That's some of it, but what studies have found is that really most of it has to do with that social capital that we talked about, the networking, getting jobs because of those connections. How do they stay that way? They have a concentration of power, importance of policy, and the earning power of that wealth. When we look at CEO to worker pay, we notice some stuff right away. And this is just comparison of CEO compensation to top income and wages, so not median, top. This is from 1947 to 2010. And the top line there is the CEO pay to top wages, 47 to 79. No, wait a second. What? Hold on. Now this doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, yeah. So the top line, the dark blue line, my CEO pay to top wages. And then the blue line is CEO pay to top income. Okay. And then the dotted lines, the indicate the, time past averages. Okay. So the top one is 1947 to 79 average. The bottom one, 1947 to 79 average. Okay. Does that make sense? So what we can see is they're fairly steady and kind of in line with those top income and wages until just into the 90s when we kind of saw this explosion. And they came down again, but you can see that they're still elevated above that average significantly. So we see ourselves as a middle class society, but are we a middle class society? Here's some important terms we want to know. Middle class squeeze. This refers to the way wage increases fail to keep up with inflation for middle income earners, but that phenomenon fails to have a similar impact on top wage earners. Okay, so we see these wage increases, but they're not keeping up with inflation, but only for folks in the middle class. Two-income trap. Today's two-income family earns 75% more money than a single-income counterpart of a generation ago, which is interesting, right? You've got two people earning, so it should be like 100% more, but it's only 75% more. But despite that increase, they have a 25% less discretionary income to cover living costs. So they're making more money, but they have less money to play with, okay, or to cover things that aren't in the monthly budget. So those folks end up trapped in a vice of debt. Another term, asset poverty. This one, I have tangible assets but no emergency fund. So maybe I own my house, maybe I own my car, but I don't have an emergency fund. And debt servitude. The average student loan debt hit a record of nearly $30,000 per student last year. I think I read somewhere it's a little higher than that now, like 36 or something. So debt servitude is basically when I'm working and I make okay income, but I make just enough to pay all my bills. There's nothing left over. There's no savings. I can't get ahead. I'm just working to exist. Okay, we talked about ideologies. Inequality is perpetuated by some ideologies. Here's some examples of them. The culture of poverty, which is this long-standing idea that basically blames poor people for being poor. The myth of meritocracy, which is the idea that America is a land of opportunity and the American dream, and that I get out of the system what I put into it. But we know from study after study after study that we're not, in fact, a society of meritocracy, that many people get things because of who they know, not what they know or what they can do. And norms and values. We value hard work, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we tend to have this idea that our hard work is always going to pay off if you just work hard enough. And our reliance on the economic system itself to succeed. Some arguments against the culture of poverty. Fewer than 5% of the poor are chronically poor. 41% of the able-bodied work. And the pattern of welfare cycling is promoted by wages too low to support a family. One of my jobs right out of college was actually handing out food stamps. It's the most depressing job I've ever had. And yeah, I quickly learned that when I had clients who bettered themselves, who started doing better, they were quickly rewarded by losing benefits. So they're working a full-time job, but making less than they were making when they were on welfare, and they can't keep their lights on, can't keep themselves fed, can't keep kids in daycare or whatever. Inequality is perpetuated in part by individualism. As a country, we don't emphasize the collective. We tend to care only about our own social location. So it's like, well, I'm doing okay, so too bad for anybody else. And invisibility. In part because of residential segregation, we don't typically see people of other classes than ours, and we don't talk about social class, which makes it more invisible. And the more invisible something is, the more I can deny how pervasive it is and how important it is. We're super uncomfortable talking about money. We're more uncomfortable talking about money in this country than we are talking about race. Well, my slide is all jacked up, but that's okay. So when we start talking about why we have stratification, we have some different theories about that depending on what perspective you're coming from. So a very popular one called the Davis-Moore perspective, which falls into the functionalist family, which we'll talk about in just a second, puts forth the idea, the thesis, if you will, that stratification has beneficial consequences, that in fact it is functional. It serves a function for the operation of the United States. And the key points of this idea are that members of society have needs, and some statuses in society are more important than others when it comes to meeting those needs. And so in order to attract the best qualified to give of their time, effort, and energy, the rewards must be sufficient in nature, income, prestige, and power. So this is very much based on this idea of meritocracy and getting what you deserve. And a big criticism that people have about this is, does everyone in America get what they deserve? And then let's take a look at that. Let's take a look at this premise that in order to fill these needs, we have to attract the best qualified, give it their time, blah, blah, blah. Think about our civil servants. Policing is a need in our society, is it not? Are we putting forth income, power, and prestige, those rewards that they're talking about, at the levels that we should be to get the most qualified, the brightest, and the best? Do cops make a lot of money? No, they do not. Make the same argument of teachers, EMTs, et cetera, et cetera. We have some folks who serve pretty important functions in our society who are not being rewarded sufficiently. Those folks tend to do those jobs because they just want to, not because of income. The functionalist approach in general, in terms of talking about social inequality, attempts to understand what role inequality plays in keeping society at equilibrium. And so they are coming from this framework that this differential system of rewards and punishment is in fact necessary for an efficient operation of society. So in their minds, there's actually a need for inequality. Okay. You'll notice that after we've talked about Marx and Weber, Marx the conflict theory and Weber symbolic interactionist, there's this pause before we start talking about the functionalists. And that's largely because for many functionalists, there's this firm belief that for better or worse, inequality plays an important role in our society. Okay? That it's necessary to ensure that the most important and complex roles will be filled by the most meritorious individuals. The problem that sociologists have with the functionalist approach is that it ignores the importance of group level analysis when it looks at inequality and tries to come at it from an individual level. I don't think I've ever met a sociologist who was a functionalist, but you'll meet many functionalists outside of sociology. Another functionalist has put forth this list and call it the functions of the poor. Here are some of them. I'm not going to read all of them. The poor do the dirty work. The poor constitute the low-wage labor pool. The poor subsidize the activities of the affluent. The poor pay a higher proportion of their income in taxes, which subsidize state and local government spending. The poor serve as guinea pigs for medical experimentation. The poor create jobs that serve to protect society against them. So you can see from this list very quickly that these are fairly dim views of the poor as a group. Okay, we've already talked about Davis and Moore's theory, but let's refresh ourselves on it. So they've argued that stratification benefits society because it ensures the most worthy roles are filled by the most talented and worthy people. So it's the idea that society society must make certain that positions are filled. Some positions are more important than others. The more important positions must be filled by more qualified people. To motivate those qualified people to fill those positions, society must offer them greater rewards. Okay, so let's take a look at how that works. First off, all jobs play a role in society and all jobs are not well compensated. But let's take a look at the sanitation worker strike in New York City in 1969. The sanitation workers went on strike in New York City in 1965, and very quickly people realized the importance of sanitation workers because the trash was piled up stories high on the streets of New York all over the place. The stench, the inconvenience, the lack of space, people very, very quickly realized all jobs play an important role in society. Okay. This outlook Davis and Moore have reifies inequality. It posits reward as a guarantee of performance, argues that reward should be based on merit, and then if abilities, what am I trying to say? Sorry, let me try that again. It posits that rewards are a guarantee of performance and that rewards are supposed to be based on merit in their argument, which is a great idea, and it's certainly an idea that we hold on to in our society in general. One problem some people have put forward is that if the abilities were inherent, that they're saying like, oh, we need these quality people, and if the abilities of those quality people were inherent, then we wouldn't need a reward system to reward them. And the second problem would be that it does not clearly indicate why some positions should be worth more than others, other than the fact that they're paid more. Okay. Other criticisms point out that we don't have a guarantee that the most qualified people occupy key roles, which is a good point. How many of you ever dealt with somebody completely incompetent in a role? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.